It started with a knock that did not belong to the night. Olivia sat in her small living room, the glow from the television washing the walls in faint light, a comfort she clung to when the dark felt too heavy. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each second crawling like something alive. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, whispering low secrets, and rain tapped the windows in soft, uneven patterns. She should have been asleep, but she wasn't. She hadn't been sleeping much since she moved into this house 3 weeks ago, a lonely house on the edge of town, too cheap to be true but too perfect to resist. That knock was soft, almost polite, but it carried something that made her stomach tighten. She froze, her breath catching as she turned the volume down on the television. Another knock followed, slow, deliberate. It came from the front door. She told herself not to move. No one should be out there. The nearest neighbor was almost a mile away, and the rain had started hours ago. Who would come here at this hour? Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling, but then the knocking came again. Louder this time, as if whoever was out there knew she heard and wanted her to answer. She stood up slowly and padded to the hallway, her socks brushing the wooden floor, and every creak of the board sounded like a warning. She approached the door with caution, every nerve screaming at her not to touch it. She peered through the peephole, but the glass was foggy from condensation, and all she saw was a vague, dark shape standing perfectly still. No movement, no shifting weight, just a figure waiting. Her hand hovered over the lock as the sound of rain filled the silence between the knocks. The voice came soft, muffled by the wood of the door, but clear enough to make her knees weaken. "Please let me in." It was a man's voice, calm, almost gentle, but there was something in it that didn't sound right. She backed away instinctively, clutching her phone like a weapon. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling, barely more than a whisper, but the figure didn't answer. The silence stretched thick and unbearable, then the knocking resumed. Not desperate, not angry, just steady like the ticking of a clock. Her breath quickened as she ran to the kitchen, her eyes darting toward the windows. They were all dark, slick with rain. She reached for the phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The storm must have killed the reception. A low hum began to seep into the house, a sound she couldn't place at first, until she realized it was a tune. The man outside was humming a lullaby, faint and broken, like something heard through a dream. Her skin crawled as the melody slithered into her bones. It was familiar, painfully familiar, like something from long ago, a song her mother used to sing when she was small. She shook her head, whispering to herself that it wasn't possible, but the tune drifted through the cracks of the door like a ghost of memory, pulling her toward it. "Please," the voice came again, closer this time, softer, almost tender, as if he were right at her ear. "Let me in, Olivia." Her name. He knew her name. She stumbled back, dropping her phone, and it clattered against the floor. Her chest heaved as she stared at the door, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. She never told anyone she was moving here, never gave out her address. How could he know? She scrambled to the window beside the door, pulling the curtain just enough to peek out, but the porch was empty. Just rain pooling on the wooden boards, shimmering under the pale glow of the porch light. No one was there. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she slowly turned her gaze back to the door. The humming stopped. Silence pressed against the house like a living thing. Then in the quiet came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the house. She heard them crunch through the wet gravel, then fade to the back. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, but something stronger held her frozen in place. A tap came at the kitchen window, light as a fingernail, and her head snapped toward it. Nothing, just the sway of the trees in the storm. She moved backward, clutching the edge of the counter, when another tap came from the opposite side of the house. Then another from the living room, like fingers testing every glass surface. He was moving around her, circling like a predator playing with its prey. Her breath hitched when the lights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the house into darkness so complete it felt like drowning. She fumbled for the drawer, pulling out a flashlight, the beam cutting a thin slice through the black. Shadows stretched long and twisted across the walls as she moved, her heartbeat loud enough to drown the storm. She made her way to the bedroom, shutting the door and locking it, though the hollow click of the lock gave no comfort. She crawled under the bed, clutching the flashlight to her chest, forcing herself to breathe quietly, her ears straining for any sound beyond the rain. For a long time there was nothing, just the storm's endless whisper. Then came the sound of the front door creaking open. She knew she had locked it. She remembered turning the bolt. But now it was opening slow, dragging across the floor as if pushed by something that didn't care about hinges. Her throat tightened as she bit down on a scream. Footsteps entered the house, soft and measured, padding across the wood like bare feet. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes as those steps moved closer, each one steady, patient, unhurried. They passed the living room, then the hallway, and stopped outside her door. Silence held the world still for a single, unbearable breath. Then the doorknob turned. The lock rattled, strained, and finally gave with a sound that cracked through the dark like bone. The door opened slow, so slow she could hear the hinges groan, and she saw the slice of light from the storm spill across the floor. She held her breath as 2 feet appeared in the gap, pale, bare, dripping rainwater that spread across the floor in black streaks. The humming began again, low and soft, the same lullaby from before, winding around her like smoke, wrapping tight around her thoughts. The figure stepped inside, his legs thin, skin sagging in strange ways, as if it didn't quite fit the bones beneath. She bit down hard on her knuckle to keep from sobbing as he stopped by the bed, the humming never breaking, never pausing. Then he knelt slowly, and the sound shifted lower, closer, until she could feel it vibrating through the floorboards. A cold hand slid under the bed, fingers impossibly long, curling toward her face. She kicked out, scrambling from under the bed, and ran, the flashlight beam spinning wild across the walls as the lullaby turned into words she couldn't understand, harsh and guttural, scraping against her mind. She tore through the hallway, her bare feet slapping the floor, and reached the front door, only to find it standing wide open. Beyond it was not the storm, not the trees, not her street. It was darkness, a darkness so thick it swallowed the rain, the wind, the world. She froze at the edge, the air cold enough to bite, and behind her came the sound of breathing, heavy and wet, inches from her neck. Olivia could feel that breath on her skin, damp and cold like the inside of a grave, and every instinct in her body screamed to leap into the dark beyond the door, but her legs refused to move. Something deep inside told her that if she stepped into that void, she would never come back, not as herself, not as anything human. The humming stopped. The silence was worse. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head just enough to see the outline of the figure behind her. It was taller than she thought, impossibly tall, its head brushing the frame of the door, its limbs too thin, too long, bent in ways that hurt to look at. The face, or what should have been a face, was wrong. It shifted like smoke caught in a jar, features forming and dissolving, always almost familiar but never quite right. And then it smiled. She didn't see teeth, not at first, just the tearing of skin, the stretching of something that shouldn't stretch, until rows of blackened, broken teeth bloomed in the darkness. She ran. She didn't think, didn't breathe, just ran back into the house because anything was better than that void outside. The door slammed shut behind her with a force that rattled the windows, and for a brief, insane moment, she thought maybe that thing had locked itself out. Then she heard it, the footsteps, inside. They were everywhere, in every wall, every floorboard, like the house itself had come alive with its presence. She darted into the basement, throwing herself down the narrow stairs, landing hard on the concrete floor, her flashlight tumbling and clattering into the corner where its beam shone weak and tilted against a wall. The basement smelled of earth and mold, damp and suffocating. She pressed herself against the wall, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold her breath still. Upstairs, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, thick and pressing, like the house was holding its breath along with her. Then she heard it whisper her name. Not in the hallway, not above her, but right behind her ear. She spun, her scream clawing up her throat, and saw nothing but the bare wall and the single dangling bulb that flickered once and died. Darkness swallowed everything except the weak beam of her fallen flashlight. She crawled toward it, her hands scraping the cold concrete, and just as her fingers brushed it, a hand, ice cold, slick like something dead, closed over her wrist. She couldn't even scream this time. She was yanked backward, her body slamming into something solid and wet, and then arms wrapped around her from behind, pinning her in a grip that didn't feel human. A voice, deep and wrong, rasped against her neck, words pouring into her ear like poisoned honey. "I've been waiting so long." She thrashed, kicked, clawed at the air, but the arms tightened, and when she felt her nails dig into its flesh, what came away wasn't blood but something black and sticky, pulsing like it was alive. She was dragged across the floor, her heels leaving streaks on the concrete, into the deepest part of the basement where the shadows seemed to move like water. She caught glimpses in the beam of her spinning flashlight, faces, dozens of them, pale and slack-jawed, pressed into the walls like the house had eaten them whole and left their shapes behind. Their eyes followed her as she was pulled past, mouths twitching as if trying to scream, but no sound came. She tried to grab the edge of the furnace, the pipes, anything to stop her descent into the dark, but her fingers slipped on the wet floor and then she was falling. Down into blackness so deep it felt like drowning in tar. When she opened her eyes, she was outside again. But it wasn't the same. The house was gone. The trees were wrong, too tall, too thin, their branches like veins crawling across a sky the color of ash. The air tasted of iron, and far off she heard something like bells, faint and broken. She stumbled forward, her feet sinking into soil that pulsed under her toes like muscle. The figure was ahead of her now, waiting at a crooked gate that led to nothing but endless black forest. It turned to her slowly, its shifting face settling, just for a moment, into something almost human, something that looked like her father's smile from an old photograph. Then it spoke in that same gentle tone from the door, the one that first made her freeze. "You opened the door, Olivia. You let me in." Its mouth split wider than any mouth should, stretching back to where ears should have been, and the lullaby returned, louder this time, spilling from that impossible grin until it filled the forest, until it filled her head, drowning out every thought. She ran again because that was all she could do, crashing through the trees, her bare feet tearing open on roots and stones. But no matter how far she ran, the forest didn't change. Every tree looked the same. Every turn led her back to the crooked gate where the figure waited, patient and smiling. The third time she stumbled back into the clearing, her legs gave out and she fell to her knees, sobbing. The sound ripped from her throat like an animal. The figure knelt with her, its head tilting too far, its long fingers stroking her hair with mock tenderness. "No one leaves after midnight," it whispered, and as its arms slid around her again, she felt the world tilt, felt herself sinking, folding into the dark, and the last thing she saw before it closed over her like a shroud was its eyes, dozens of them, blooming open all over its face, watching her vanish. The next morning the house stood quiet, its door shut, its windows blind. The storm had passed, leaving the street clean and still. A mailman came by, dropped letters into the box, and never noticed the faint marks on the porch, like someone had clawed at the wood. That night at exactly 12, the knocking began again. Slow, polite, patient.